welcome everyone here. It's a distinguished crowd and definitely representative of a lot of different interests in the area, and we're glad you all could be here and join us. As Ross mentioned, we have a number of things we want to go through today. You should have gotten a packet with materials, and additional materials have been handed out. We'll bring those to your attention as we go through the agenda. My role is to ensure that this process is equitable and effective and efficient. And in that vein, we are going to try to stick to our 2-hour meeting, and we'll work towards that. The other thing that we're trying to accomplish, in addition to what Ross mentioned, was an understanding of what the issues are and agreement that those are issues that need to be addressed. But we don't have any expectations that in this 2 hours we're going to wrestle all these things to the ground. There's other groups and individuals that are meeting, bringing information to the authority and to this group to help us move forward with the TEP. I want to bring your attention to the agenda, and I just want to go over that real quick, and then we'll start so you know where we're headed towards. Also, there are white cards, speaker cards at the front, I believe, and if you want to make a comment either during the opportunity to talk on issues not on the agenda, or there's agenda items that you'd like to talk on, please fill out the card. You can just raise your hand and one of the staff will collect it, and we'll call on folks as they come in. So we'll complete convening the meeting in just a minute. We'll have an opportunity for public comment, and that's public comment on issues not listed on the agenda. We'll take a look at the minutes, and then finish up our general business with the EPAC meeting calendar, so you'll get a sense of where we're going, and just quickly go over the action item log. The substantive regular agenda items that you see on page 2 include reviewing our accomplishments to date. So that'll be an opportunity to hear where we've come from and what we've gathered to date. And then we'll talk about, we'll just review the structure of the TEP, so people are clear on that. It's been a while. And then we'll talk about our path forward, and talking with some folks early on here. People are very interested in seeing that we know where we're headed, and only under those circumstances can we get there. So in that respect, there's some handouts here from Measure J we'll talk about in a little bit, which should hopefully help the discussion move forward. And then probably the most substantive issues or agenda item we have are towards the end, and that's the subgroup discussions. We are going to have some report outs on that, both the community vision that Joel was instrumental in putting together, but with a lot of other folks providing input. And then we'll have hopefully a lively discussion on incentivizing infill. I'll try to moderate a discussion on that topic when we get to it, and then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So that's what we're going to try to get into 2 hours. And just for those of you who are not familiar with the facility, there's bathrooms down the hall to your right, and there's water and some refreshments, I think. So I wanted to move into public comment, and this would be members of the public are invited to address the committee regarding any item that's not listed on the agenda. So this is for other items not listed on the agenda. Have we collected any cards for that topic? Okay, having heard none, we'll close the public comment item, and we'll move to approval of the minutes. Now, the minutes are in your packet. These are from Monday, October 12th. Are there any changes, deletions, corrections for the minutes? Looks like people are prepared to approve them. So all in favor of approving the minutes from October 12th, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay.
Sierra Club abstains.
Sierra Club abstains. Do you have any particular changes that you wanted? Are you going to submit them, but you're just abstaining? Okay, thank you. The next item is item D, and that's the meeting calendar. In your packet, it says Expenditure Plan Advisory Committee, EPAC meeting calendar. It's attachment D.1-1, and that's mine. So it identifies the 27th, our meeting today, which is from 2:30 to 4:30, and this is for the Lafayette Library here. But please note that the next meeting and subsequent meetings are all going to be at the Assembly Hall in Walnut Creek at 1375 Civic Drive. So I don't want to see folks coming over here by mistake because they were here last time. So if you put it in your calendar, please put it at the Assembly Hall, Civic Park Community Center, 1375 Civic Drive in Walnut Creek. And the subsequent meetings are listed down there: February 25th, the 10th, the 21st, and the 12th, if needed. And those are, just to make things a little more complicated, from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, not what we're doing today, which is 2:30 to 4:30. So thank you for bearing with us so that we could get a location. The action item list is the next item, and that follows the expenditure plan meeting calendar. We have 28 items on there, and the ones up to 26 have been closed. One of them will be closed pending the meeting today, 27, and we're working on the on 28, or yeah, we're working on 28, so that is pending the 310 meeting of the EPAC. Any questions or comments on those items? Dave?
Just a comment on the schedule. You say, if needed, a meeting May 12th. Just for everybody's knowledge, that's Bike to Work Day in the Bay Area. Bike East Bay will be quite busy, so if that's needed, maybe we could find a different date.
Okay, so noted.
I'll have other things to do.
If not, those who live out of the county will be happy to pick you up. You have to bike from a very far distance.
It's not a mode issue, it's a...
I get it.
Right.
I get it. But it wasn't changed for a Jewish holiday, so I'm just saying.
Just a request.
Okay. Thank you very much. And next item, yes.
Number 23 says see attachment D. Is that here?
No, Matt, that one was attachment B on the, in that packet. So you have to go back to that packet. That's a good point. We'll clarify that.
Okay, so we've got those. Moving on to our regular agenda items. Now, these agenda items, there'll be an opportunity for folks to comment. Representatives of the general public will provide them with an opportunity to comment after the presentations, and then we will entertain discussion amongst the EPAC members. So the first item is reviewing the accomplishments to date. We thought it would be helpful if we spent a little bit of time on that. This is provided to you, but there is no handout on this particular topic. Bear with me for just a moment. Don't seem to have it. What's that? Matt, do you have a new version of that? I must have got scooped up. Thanks so much, appreciate it. Sorry about that delay. So I just want to highlight the accomplishments of what we've achieved so far. I know there's been previous meetings of which I haven't been a part, but to highlight those, since the EPAC began meeting in June of 2015, we've spent time discussing and agreeing upon the goals and policies, and goals and policies and objectives were put together. At the request of EPAC members, for additional information, we've heard presentations from leaders in transportation to provide information. And those leaders included Grace Krunikan, the general manager of BART, to talk about BART priorities and potential ballot measure, their own ballot measure. We got a presentation by Katie Bednauer, Chief Transportation Planning at Caltrans, to talk about the 2040 plan. We've heard from Art Dow, the executive director of ACTC, and they've had a couple of their own sales tax measures, so he came to provide information, and particularly information on their successful Measure BB ballot measure. Elizabeth O'Donohue of the Nature Conservancy, and John Kopchak, director of Contra Costa County Department of Conservation and Development, chatted with us and shared information about the regional advanced mitigation planning for California. And we had a presentation on complete streets, and in your packet there's that presentation has been provided. Also, in response to the EPAC members' request, we've heard presentations focusing on local needs and priorities from the Contra Costa Regional Transportation Planning Committees. That's Transpac, SWAT, Transplan, and WICTAC. We've also gotten information from the City Managers Association, and then also from the bus transit operators, including Tri-Delta, AC Transit, County Connection, and WestCat. So time has been spent trying to get smart and get clear on what's happening in terms of transportation in the region, where the EPAC has asked for specific information. We've tried to get it and provide it, whether it's in writing or in presentations that are provided. And I know that we'll continue to do that and make information available that the EPAC members feel is necessary in order for them to come up with a recommendation that's informed. So the next item is, well, let me check here. Are there any comments from the general public on this topic item, on the review of the accomplishments to date? Okay. Then let's go ahead and move on to...
Quick comment.
Yes.
Dave. Can you update us on how the website update is coming along for Measure J reauthorization, and are these materials up there?
I'm not sure. Everything from these meetings and all our board meetings are posted on our meeting page. We don't have a page set up specifically for this effort right here. So is that a suggestion that we try to do something like that? Or?
Well, I understood that was going to happen back in the second half of last year, that we were actually going to have a website that was more engaging for the public and for.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, so we had a website that was set up under the Countywide Transportation Plan effort, and we've continued that. And we extended that into a way to capture public comment. So that was concluded. We forgive me, it's been a while. I don't remember if we've talked about it at this meeting, so I don't want to get into too much detail if we've already talked about it. But members of the public could get 10 coins and deposit their coins. So we have the results of that, so we could share that with the group. So we completed that effort. We had paper surveys for folks that didn't have access, and we did a series of telephone town halls through, one in each of the regions of the county. So we have a summary report of that we could share with the group.
Well, just a request, I think it would be nice to have a Measure J website. So if I need this presentation that was done 3 months ago, I don't need to go find my paper packet or find the PDF agenda attachment from a certain date. It's a very engaging website that sort of shows the best information to date and, whatever.
All right, we can see what we can do about that. Yeah, we walked through how to get everything through the. We've set up a TEP site, so we can refresh that discussion, because everything is available. I think you're looking for it to be concentrated in one spot, so we can see how we can make it easier to access, because I think everything is up there. It's just how you get to it.
Yeah, no, it's there. It's just
Yeah.
PDF attachments to agendas to meetings is not a great website to make.
Okay.
Right. Any other members of the EPAC have comments on the item 1? Okay. And the next item is item 2, to review the structure of the TEP. The Transportation Authority and consultant staff will review the overall structure and components that make up the CCTA Measure J Transportation Expenditure Plan. And there are some attachments that are provided in addition to the handouts. And I bring your attention to the Measure J packet that was given to you when you came in. That looks like this. It's got a picture on the front of it, as well as the outline of the draft expenditure plan outline, which is part of the handouts, or part of the packet that was delivered to EPAC members.
Yeah, so I'm going to handle this item, walk you through it. I think a lot of the comments we heard as we're going through these discussions is how do the different things we're talking about fit into what we're trying to do in producing this transportation expenditure plan. And we think that just getting this document out, turning the pages will help do that. And the other thing I think it'll illustrate as I walk through this is that a lot of things we're talking about now have been discussed in the past as well. So we're not really starting from scratch on a lot of these things. And I'll try to point those out as I walk through this, because I think it helps set up some of the remainder of the agenda. So you look at the outline or the Measure J document. Like any good document, we have an executive summary that just kind of talks a little bit about why we're doing this and a list of the projects and programs that are included. The next set of pages, and then it's pages 4 through 24, are the summary of expenditures, the things that we're going to invest money in, and succeeding levels of detail. So everything that's in here is repeated 3 times. So pages 4 and 5 simply lists a very short description of the different kinds of projects and programs that would be funded out of Measure J, and where those dollars would go. I think we've talked quite a bit about, and I think you all know the county's organized into 4 subregions, so you can see how the dollars are allocated to each of the 4 subregions and how that provides, on page 5, a fair share of projects and programs, kind of towards the middle of 5. And that's something that's built into our culture, is that we have a very diverse county. Measure C established these 4 subregions into our structure, and we have robust debates on what goes into the expenditure plan as we develop it, but once we approve the expenditure plan, or the voters, I should say, approve the expenditure plan, we work very closely with each other to make that happen. So that what we call regional equity is built in, and I know that's something that may be a part of the discussion that we have as we go forward with a potential new plan. The next set of pages, it's 6 through 10, is pretty much the same thing with a few more words talking about the scope of each of these items and what we're trying to accomplish. Keep turning the pages, starting on page 11. And this is probably the bulk of the document here. This is a detailed description of all the funding programs, the different categories that are in it. And as you walk through this, again, it's a little more detail as to the scope, but it also includes some of the, depending on what kind of words you want to use, policies or rules or whatever that govern how these dollars are allocated. And I just want to pull out a couple of examples that really are continuing into some of the discussions that we've had. If you go to page 12, in category 5, there's a category for East County corridors, and it talks about Vasco and State Route 4 bypass, Byron Highway, et cetera. And for those of you who know the geography, and I think most of you do, that a lot of the development or a lot of the location of these projects are outside the urban limit line. So you can see where we have built right into this document, which was what the voters approved, for corridors lying outside the 2004 boundary of the Contra Costa ULL. Local sales tax funds may be allocated by the authority only to fund environmental review, route adoption studies, right-of-way protection, and safety improvements. Such investments, allocations may be made upon determination that the projects meet some of these criteria that are in bullets. And I'm not here to debate whether that was good or bad, just to illustrate that some of the things we're talking about in terms of how we want to control the expenditures, that's just an example. Another example that I was going to call out, page 15. Bike ped, if you look at that, it's very simple. 2/3 of the funds will go to complete projects in the countywide bicycle and pedestrian plan. Reason I use that example is this references a different plan that is one that would live and breathe and grow over time. So instead of saying we're going to fund these specific bike bike paths and trails, we're going to tie it to a plan that's developed through a public process. So there again, just something, a way for us to try to deal with the unknown. And then the next paragraph in that same section is 1/3 of the funds will be allocated to the Park District for their development and rehab of paved regional trails. So again, it's a combination of here's how the dollars are cut up, but here's some of the rules that apply for those dollars. Page 16, hope I have my page right, yeah. Category 14, bus operators. Here, since the transit properties don't necessarily line up right with our subregions, which I showed you earlier is how we cut up the dollars. That's just allocating how much would go to each of the bus operators. Again, just a rule that had to be hammered out to develop this document. And page 17 starts what probably has the longest description, transportation for seniors and peoples with disabilities. And again, again, not to go through and have a debate about whether what's in here is right or wrong. This just outlines, again, in quite a bit of detail of how the funds can be allocated. So as we start talking about how we want to use the dollars and we start talking about different conditions or rules, policies, et cetera, you can see there is room for that discussion, and the outcome of what we have, if approved by our board and approved by the voters with this document, it's what will guide us over the life of a possible new measure. Beginning on page 25 is the growth management program. And subsequent to that are some additional documents related to the urban limit line and the Transportation for Livable Communities program. So the growth management program was included in Measure C that was passed in 1988. So what this document did is incorporated some changes that occurred in 2004 as through a process like we're talking about now. You flip over to page 29, Measure C did not include the principles for agreement for establishment of the urban limit line. So this was a new section that was included in Measure J that was not in Measure C. So again, whether we talk about revising what's in here or putting in additional conditions, again, this discussion is just to illustrate that there's places for that. Page 31 is a summary of the what we call our TLC program, Transportation for Livable Communities. This program didn't exist in Measure C, so it was created for Measure J. And as you can see, we wanted to put some more guidelines to how that program would be managed. So it's more than what we saw in the prior sections, and being a new program, a decision was made to include an entirely new section for the TLC program. So if we decide on new programs that aren't in Measure J, example we talk a lot about is complete streets, potentially something like this document would be developed and incorporated as well. So again, a point of this is not to say Measure J was good or bad, it's just to show that this is the structure of what we're working on and how what we're working on would fit into a structure. I know, again, repeating myself, a lot of the discussion has been, okay, we're going to have a lot of talk about this stuff and hopefully reach some consensus that our board ultimately buys into. What do we do next? And that's to put together a document like this. This document was incorporated into the ordinance that our board adopted to seek asking the voters to approve a tax, and then by reference, this is what the voters approved. Couple other just real quick comments, the significance about it. We are one of 20 counties that have gone through this process. We call ourselves the self-help counties. This is kind of our Bible. We use the mantra over and over. It's promises made, promises kept. When the voters are asked to pull a lever, they know how their dollars are going to be spent. If you go fill up your gas tank, for those of you that have a gas tank, you don't know where those dollars go. They go into some program in Sacramento or Washington, and you don't necessarily know where they go. This is the guide that gives the voters and all the other stakeholders, you guys included, the assurance that the dollars that are collected over the life of the potential new measure, how they would be spent. So we just wanted to show you this structure, see if it makes sense, see if it helps answer the question, what happens to our discussion, and certainly open to any comments or questions if we didn't hit the mark with that.
So first I'll ask for any general public comments. Are there any cards for this topic? No? Then we'll move on to EPAC comments on presentation. Any thoughts? Makes sense? I think a lot of people were looking for both the outline and you know, what this looks like when it's put together, what a measure looks like when it's put together. So that helps, kind of going back to what we were talking before about having a goal, specific a structure that we can follow and head towards. So this is generally what we're heading for this measure as well. Okay. So we're moving on then.
Ben?
Yes.
I don't know if I can ping you in the future, but a comment from Bike East Bay as a preview to the Complete Streets discussions, which I hope we get to soon, is in our perspective, the Complete Streets program is a better major roads program. It's not a better transportation for livable communities program. And you sort of mentioned there that Complete Streets might be associated with transportation for livable communities. It would be our preference that it's associated with the better major roads category, which we see in the current Measure J.
Okay. Thank you. We're also, I didn't mention, but we're documenting this both specifically and then the highlight the comments that are made. So if you have any comments yourself, if these are accurately being done, please let us know. Any other comments on behalf of the EPAC?
I have a general question. Because in Measure J, the urban limit line and the growth management plan were included in that measure, is it necessary to include it in whatever measure is put on the ballot in 2016? Is that a precedent that had been set forth, so that's the example that we follow, or is it necessary to include or to update? Can you kind of give us some background on what's necessary to be included in this plan versus things that have already been done in the past?
Well, that's an interesting question. Now, so major difference between what happened in 2004 and what we're doing now. 2004, people were seeing the end of Measure C, and it was really just it was extending Measure C, and they took the time to make some adjustments to the program. So with what we're talking about of potentially going to the ballot this fall 2016, there's going to be 17 years of overlap of Measure J and a new measure if we are successful in putting that on the ballot. So somehow they have to be reconciled. The current urban limit line, the requirements in Measure J will remain unchanged unless they're changed by a vote of the public. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but it's very difficult to ignore it unless we all agree that what's in here is satisfactory going forward to at least 2034. And then, we could have an ordinance that's just silent, and then what's in here would govern.
So if an updated urban limit line or growth management plan was included in a 2016 measure, that wouldn't take precedent over the current Measure J funding through 2024, right?
It could. We could amend Measure J as part of this process. So it's all everything's on the table. Leave it as is, tweak it, major overhaul. All three of those options are on the table, and it's the outcome of that discussion is going to give us and our attorneys a lot of work to try to figure out how to stitch it all together.
Okay, thanks.
So that everybody's clear, and I just wanted to reiterate, there's two. There's an existing measure that's in place right now, and we're talking about an additional measure. That's kind of a reflection of the needs in transportation, trying to keep up with them. And this is not the first time that some of these self-help counties have taken this approach. So I just wanted to make sure that people were clear on that. Margaret, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was thinking more specifically about statewide. What are some state parameters that might be working themselves? Like, this isn't 2004, this is a post-SB 375 world, or what are some of those implications and some of the climate change implications that you weren't there when you were working on the first one?
Yeah, so we've had that discussion. They were included in the principles that we would meet or exceed all the requirements of law out of 375 and subsequent laws and executive orders. So yeah, that's part of the change in environment. The other part of the change in environment is that the state hasn't raised the gas tax since 1983 1992 or 93, so the buying power just isn't there. And then with the emergence of more efficient fuels, et cetera, so it's less money from the state and changes in policies from the state. And that's why we're sitting around talking about how we best use whatever revenues we might be able to get.
I think they clarified it's 1994.
Last penny was collected in 1994.
Yeah.
It was a 5-cent increase, 1 cent each year.
Okay. Other comments? Observations? Okay.
Yeah, I do. So am I hearing that the current Measure J is actually up for discussion and changing it? Like, not just from 2033 to when it is?
Sorry. How can I be evasive in this quick answer?
That's not a bad.
It's, we have to be very, it's possible. Opinion is we need to be very careful on what we talk about. Now, in response to Andrew's question, it'd be very difficult to have the same policy that, that in an overlapping measure that was different. So, he asked a question I think is very valid too. You could say, there's probably 5 or 6 different options you could do. You could say for the urban limit line, it's going to remain the way it is through the end of Measure J, and then a new measure will change with new criteria. So I guess the word I used before was reconcile. Where there are things that could potentially conflict, we need to reconcile. I'd hope we don't walk out of here anybody saying we're going to change Measure J, because that gets back to this promises made, promises kept. And if we start changing our promise, we're going to lose a lot of support.
Yeah. Debbie?
I will just say, I don't even need a microphone, to that end, because I had that same sort of thought process. Oh my gosh, new opportunity. But a lot of the money has already been spent on the Measure J. And so if we change Measure J, it opens a can of worms that you can't begin to fix. So as much as I would love to go back and reallocate how senior and disabled transportation was addressed back then, I just, for the good of the order, because I would love to do that, recognize that things like the Caldecott Tunnel we're going to be paying for over the next however many years, but it's already done. The fourth bore is there. You can't take it away. So just to put it in that context so we don't end up going down a rabbit hole we can't explore.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Debbie. Yeah, the point of this discussion was just to use this as an example of how everything fits together, and I really don't want to open up, was this a good thing or bad thing, and try to change it, because I can guarantee that's not going to be a productive or successful exercise. The promises made, promises kept is the thing that keeps us alive.
Any other comments? Okay, then we'll move on, and we're generally right on time for our target. So on the next item is the update and the path forward, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. There's a couple of items, a graphic that indicates how we see the various publics and stakeholders and their role in providing recommendations to the transportation authorities and their standing and advisory committees. So the regional transportation planning committees include these groups that you see underneath, and the EPAC, this group, includes a whole cross-section of people and interests in the region. We've really tried to get as much representation as possible. Transportation might not be the priority of the institution, but you could certainly argue that they're dependent on transportation, whether it's the Paratransit Coordinating Council or others who have been identified here in Central Labor Labor Council, Transform, and others. So we really tried to make sure that we got representation throughout. They're providing their input and having dialogues with the public at large and agencies. And then finally, the public at large gets an opportunity to provide their input as well, including through these mechanisms, telephone town halls, public workshops, focus groups, surveys, and presentations to the board and others. So a significant effort is being made to inform people about this opportunity and get their input and feedback. The next handout is the schedule and time frame for where we're going. Again, this was brought up, the importance of understanding where we're headed, and what the timing is for us to get there and what we have to accomplish. You'll see at the top of the pages, the first, it's kind of a three-phase thing from a standpoint of putting this together. First, developing the draft TEP and coming up with a draft like this, and then it's reviewing the draft TEP and going through the process of having the committees and others review the draft TEP, and then the final TEP, which culminates in the approval of the final TEP on adopting an ordinances, and requires the Board of Supervisors to place the ballot on the measure on the ballot. So this gives you a sense. On the left side of that, it shows the different entities and how their schedule falls with respect to the submission of the TEP. So we will go to August or the late summer, and then when we're done with our work, actually we'll be done with our work earlier than that, but the Board of Supervisors will have to approve this again to get it on the measure, and then the campaign, which is separate from the activities that are going on here, would commence in that general time frame. I know, I think we have one card at least for this item. Is there, Jack, did you want to make a comment? And can we get that card too? Can someone collect that card?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We don't need that because this is an EPAC representative. Sorry. Go ahead, Jack.
Thank you. I apologize for taking us off the agenda. My name is Jack Weir. I'm the president of the Contra Costa Taxpayers Association, and I have participated in these EPAC meetings. Again, I apologize for going off agenda, and I apologize for not preparing this material and having it to you in advance. I hope you will appreciate that we're moderately busy nowadays trying to keep up with the flood of tax measures that are being proposed, of which this is one, and it's a very important one to us. I'm guided in my role as the president by our executive committee, and at our last executive committee meeting, we went over our understanding of the way this proposal and plan is evolving, and I want to share with you the sense of the executive committee. But first, I want to make one thing very clear. Cocoa tax never takes a formal position on a ballot measure until we see the published ballot measure. We think the devil is, in fact, in the details, but I want to share with you the executive committee's sense of the possibilities in terms of how we might react to this measure as we understand it being proposed. We absolutely recognize the dire need for repair and improvement of our transportation and our transportation facilities. And by that, I'm talking primarily about the hard stuff, the roads, streets, bridges, and so forth, many of which have deteriorated to a condition where they are frankly not safe. And that's appalling to us. Secondly, we do support the need to improve the efficiency of our transit systems in order to allow people to get themselves and their goods around the county efficiently. But I want you to appreciate that in the world we live in, there's an 800-pound gorilla that is influencing virtually every decision every government body makes, and that's in the enormous unfunded post-retirement obligation that the state and virtually all public agencies in the state now share. As of this morning, I'm going to cut this short in a minute, I appreciate it. This morning I read the Union Watch Digest, which is estimating that the current estimated California unfunded post-retirement obligation exceeds $500 billion. That's billion with a B, that's $500 billion. And every time I see a new estimate of the figure, it goes up. We see on a day-to-day basis how this is influencing local government that we care about primarily here in the county. Cities, special districts, school districts, county, so forth. In fact, we're actively working with two organizations that are so hard-pressed in order to make their pension premiums, they've had to significantly cut public service in the fire and emergency response area, which is not acceptable. So, again, we don't take formal positions until the ballot measure comes out. My executive committee is inclined to support an extension of this measure if the dollars are spent on transportation and transportation only kinds of projects, including transit. We are not likely to support an increase in the tax, primarily for the reason that I just shared with you. We see the state essentially abandoning its traditional funding responsibility and shifting the burden for these kinds of projects and ongoing infrastructure funding down to the local level. I also want to say that having heard over the months all of these indications of the need and desires, they are worthy goals and objectives all. We don't downplay or demean or undervalue the importance of all of these considerations, but our feeling is we've got to really focus and squeeze the maximum transportation and transit benefit we can out of the limited dollars, no matter how they obtain. Once again, thank you very much for letting me take this time. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weir. So other comments from the EPAC? Well, you want to go first and then Matt?
Oh. Where are we with the draft 2016 Countywide Transportation Plan and its accompanying environmental impact report?
Okay, so back in December, I believe it was, our board took an action to revise the approach a little bit. Maybe it's not so much to revise the approach, but to take additional time to incorporate new requirements out of SB 743, changing from VMT based to, or I'm sorry, changing from level of service based to vehicle miles traveled based. Just this week, no, actually it was last week, OPR released guidelines for comment, so we're tracking that very closely. So Martin, who's over in the corner here, is working with our regional committees to see what type of actions we need to take to revise their action plans. And that's really, the action plans are the element of our countywide transportation plan that drives the need for an EIR. So everything's on a hold until we see what the final guidelines look like and how that impacts the action plans.
So does that mean the TEP goes forward without the benefit of an EIR and the countywide plan guidance?
Correct.
Has that been done before?
Yes, yeah, it's commonly done. Now, we still have a countywide plan from our previous plan, but you need a plan to build on. They don't have to be developed in sync or at the same time. We, by coincidence of where we are with the countywide plan, we linked them together because it makes sense, but we need to step back a little bit with these new state requirements. And
that bill was passed in more than 2 years ago. And I don't know of any other CMA in the Bay Area that's approaching that issue as you are.
And no other CMA in the Bay Area has the same, has these action plans. So, we do it different. We think it's different in a good way, and that's really the difference. To my knowledge, and Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, none of the other CMA's countywide transportation plan requires an EIR. We're the only one.
Well,
Thank you. Just looking at this timeline that you pointed out earlier, if you've got the Board of Supervisors adopting in August, then we've got September and October basically to raise money, campaign. It seems rather late from my experience of these things. I'm wondering what kind of confidence you folks have, and if such a short time frame for fundraising and campaigning has been achieved in the past around the measures that you have won, and maybe even some thoughts about how some of the measures were lost in the past.
Yeah, that sounds like a question I should answer. Bill Gray, I've been involved in the last 2 campaigns, and very similar to one of the earlier comments, I think the people that funded the campaigns in the past are waiting to see a product. But I have every confidence if the product deals with the core issues of transportation and mobility, there'll be some support for it. It's always a challenge to raise dollars for that, and we are aware of that, and we're starting the dialogue. But the reality is that we won't raise any real money until we get to a point where this group, the board, and everybody else is in general consensus on a program and projects and programs.
Yeah, just specifically towards the schedule here, this is working backwards from the date that the latest date that the board can take action to put it on a ballot, which is 77 days prior to the election.
And that hasn't, have you folks been able to pull something like that off in the past?
Yeah.
With such a late adoption?
Well, in 2004, we had very similar discussions, and we actually had a special meeting of the board in late May to adopt the plan, and then between May and July, the cities all signed off on it. Their statutory requirement, to approve it. But basically, the work was done at the meeting in May.
Okay.
Final work. So we have some time.
Yes.
We don't have a lot of time, but we have time.
Okay, thank you.
well, I'm working with another region, and they're in the same boat, same time frame.
Got it. Thank you.
So it's not unusual. Okay, we're about on time. Is there any other comments on this topic, on our path forward? Okay, next item is item 4.0, the subgroup discussions. And we're going to get a presentation on the community vision by Joel DeValcourt, and he's going to present the community vision for new transportation sales tax, and for members to comment on. And we'll talk a little further about the community vision. Yes.
Are there going to be action items related to this agenda item? Or is this just
Not today.
informational?
This is informational.
Okay, thanks.
Yes. And yeah, we'll try to get the presentation going, so we spend 10 minutes or so on that, and then I'll have 20 minutes to talk about it, and we'll move on to the next item.
Yeah, I think the point is to encourage as much discussion as possible. And Andy, to your question, it isn't an action item, but it's clearly an opportunity for dialogue.
I'm sorry, I have a quick question. I see this, I was hoping item 3, honestly, was going to lay out the schedule when we have to decide on this, but that was also going to get into a little detail on how we were going to decide this. Are we going to start with the current Measure J as a baseline and go from there? Are we going to all present as subcommittees ideas and then we vote? How has this worked in the past? I'm ready to, roll my sleeves up and have the discussion.
So what I'm hearing is Joel needs a better introduction, because the answer to your question is Joel and the coalition, and I keep saying Joel, and hopefully we'll recognize everyone. First off, the community vision document is in your packet, and all the endorsers are, at least at a point in time, there may be more since then, Joel, you can point that out. They put together this document that really touches on all the issues that we've talked about pretty much all the issues that are in this document with just a little bit about how we cut up the money. So you either start with how do you cut up the money and how do you control it, or do you say, let's talk about what we're trying to achieve as an outcome and decide on that and then invest our dollars to get to that outcome. So we're going to start with what's in this document, which, at least in my opinion, and we'll ask you as when Joel's completed, does this really capture everything that we need to be talking about as we structure? So we're not, we could start from this, and ultimately what Bill and I and our team are going to do is take the outcome of this discussion and start editing what's in here to update it based on this discussion. But we're using this as a starting point. Our board has seen this and has kind of wrapped their arms around 8 or 10 big policy areas that come out of this document that are coincident with what we've talked about. Again, most of them are in Measure J. So the process we want to do is to review this and first get a sense of what are the 8 or 10 topic areas we need to talk about, and then start working through those individually. So you'll see on, kind of back to Andrew's question, item 4.2 isn't listed as an action item, but our hope is that we go through a discussion, a general discussion of what's in the community vision document, drill into some more detail about how to incentivize infill, and then maybe not by a vote, but by nodding a head, say, we think we've got pretty good consensus with this group, and we move forward with that in terms of how the team would see incorporating that into a revised Measure J. So the subsequent agendas will be similar to what you see on item 4.2, picking off 1 or 2 topics and getting into detailed discussion.
And I would add too, where there is not consensus, we will reflect that, or the group will reflect that in its presentation and recommendations to the CCTA board.
I think we have.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily want to jump the shark, but since you asked it, there is another handout on the table. It's called Summary of CCTA and EPAC Policy Topic Lists. And as Joel's walking through the presentation, maybe you can glance at this. Again, this is intended to be a side-by-side of what we've targeted for discussion at the board, some of the things we've heard here. Community vision is, I think, consistent with both of these. So this is ultimately the outline of what we want to talk about, and as time permits, I think we want to start scheduling when we talk about each of these items. So did that work, Sean?
Yeah. I was kind of jumping back to item 3, but that's helpful. Thanks for explaining.
Yeah. We were going to discuss this as item 3, and we all forgot. So thank you for the reminder.
Okay. No comments for now, and we're going to go ahead with the presentation then.
Thank you for that more thorough introduction. And I don't know, I've been in these EPAC meetings as long as you guys have, so I know we're a tough crowd. So I'll try and keep it as brief as I can. This is a modification of a presentation I gave to the CCTA commissioners on January the 6th, which was right after the holidays. So it was a lot of fun to do this during the end of the year, and my New Year's was a good time. So forgive me for any indiscretions on that. I have a presentation to give here, but since this is a slightly less formal opportunity, feel free if you have questions along the way. Otherwise, we can keep them for the end, and we'll continue our discussion that way. As well as for those who have seen it before, it's slightly trimmed back to focus primarily on our vision for transit, as well as the connections with transportation and infill, and less on some of the other things that we covered for the commissioners. So We have plenty of other material to go over. So I've been invited today to represent a growing coalition of environmental, labor, transportation, housing, social justice, faith, civic, and other public interest groups representing Contra Costa voters. And as we all know, that we're all here for a really good reason, and we're building on 30 years of good leadership in Contra Costa, and we expect more leadership over the next 30 years in whatever we may adopt here. And since this is a great time of change, I think everyone captures it well, whether it's dire consequences in our funding or an opportunity to recalibrate our priorities and investments. We all know that now is a really important time for Contra Costa. And so today my conversation, I guess you could say, is really based around two major themes, which is the bedrock connection between transportation and land use. And as we continue, I also look forward to some of my colleagues bringing forward some of the other issues. So our vision and policy document covers a wide range of issues, and this is a really kind of targeted look at a few of those components. And just for a little bit of background, and I think it's already been provided somewhat, but just in a more condensed way, smart growth, conservation, and transportation have been linked in Contra Costa since 1988. With the passage of Measure C, it established the link between these and really led to the county's urban limit line development in Measure C of 1990. And so really we've had 25 years experience with early versions of an urban limit line, and we've continued to make modifications as we move forward. In 2004, Measure J, we enhanced our urban limit lines and created as well the Transportation for Livable Communities program. Much of that we're seeing kind of moving out just in the last year or so. Both of these really came from coalitions of stakeholders that worked really deeply with the commission as well as voters to come up with innovative programs that were really the first in the state. And voters have continued to strongly favor these connections as well as their enhancement throughout the county, both in West, Central, and East. And so this is really about building on our success and building on Generation 1 to create a Generation 2 for Contra Costa. So what's next? First, just want to give a brief introduction to some of the issues facing us on these kind of broad categories of transportation, climate change, as well as land use and the kind of accompanying housing market. In terms of transportation, we're facing, and I don't think it really goes much more to say, that we have ever-increasing traffic and congestion throughout the county, particularly for those who live in Central and East County, and that we have an aging transit system that really will require the right kinds of key investments to make it world-class. We have new climate regulations from the state. We all know that SB 375 has created these new sustainable community strategies throughout the region as well as the state, and it offers us an opportunity really to look at how we can become more resilient as we move forward as a county. We also have a shift at Caltrains, and there's kind of a built-in recognition now that we feel if we build more highways, we're going to get more traffic. And so in many ways, the state itself has unequivocally outgrown the era of build it to go faster. Oops, one last piece here. In terms of land use, we also have housing costs that are rising at really the national maximum. We have the most expensive housing market in the entire country, if not one in the entire world. And so we have a pressing demand for new homes and jobs within our cities and towns, and Contra Costa can't see itself as exempt from that. And so we have a great opportunity in our county to create safe and convenient ways to get to transit, as well as other types of transportation, walking, biking, and of course those who would like to continue using their cars. And what's great is that at the same time as demand is growing, we also have a change in preferences from commuters who are increasingly attracted to living in compact and accessible communities, and city centers eventually are kind of accommodating that and growing faster than other parts of the county. And these are the types of places that are thriving and walkable, and the places where we can really focus our investments. And the good thing is that we've made our start with that already. Our county has adopted priority development areas as well as conservation areas. Not every jurisdiction has them. And it's investing in numerous plans that will create these homes and jobs. And what's great is that we can see that this scope can be accommodated through 2040, and what we have is an existing urban growth boundaries. To the transportation point a little bit more directly, we can see that mass transit, particularly BART, is making it easier for commuters across the county. BART carries, as you can see, these are BART slides. They carry as many people through the Caldecott Tunnel during peak hours as those who drive through the tunnel, just about 1,000 short. And what happens when BART goes down is that traffic very clearly skyrockets. And for those who are in East County in particular, it brings the entire county to a gridlock. So what this means is that it's really critical that we make our existing system perform at its best. It's essentially providing competitive, high-quality, well-maintained transit options so that we can all decide how we want to get around both our county, our local jurisdictions, as well as the region as a whole. And for alleviating traffic for those at a broader level, it means giving better and more competitive transit options for all of us. And so our platform recommends several considerations for these. The first is investing in our transit system for peak performance as well as operations. This is about prioritizing the fix-it-first strategies, which is called for by BART leadership as well as transit professionals throughout the region. Second one of these is closing key gaps in bus service and investing in key routes and PDAs. What this means is making sure that people can get from places like West County to the county seat, which is Martinez, on a bus. I think it's quite striking that we have such limited access even to our county seat, and that to me is quite frankly a tragedy and a sign of where we've planned before. The third is a mobility management system for fully accessible transit, and this is a really critical way we can have accessible service for all riders throughout the county as well as the region, because we need to make sure that everyone is able to make it where they need to go.
Yay.
The fourth piece of this is creating affordable and accessible transit options. Just as housing costs are increasing, so are transit costs, and there are other innovative ways that we can approach this issue. West County has a very innovative program, and we look forward to seeing more options like that. The last piece here is investing in walking, biking connections to get people safely and conveniently to transit. Good thing is this has already started, both with the Transportation for Livable Communities passed in 2004 in Measure J, as well as other things that have come from the region. And these have given us a lot of critical, however, still not quite enough investments to get to and from safely in transit. So you might wonder, we have all of these things and people are still deciding to drive. And that, of course, is a reality with which we all must address some of our transportation innovations of the future. So what we need to do is look at how we can double down on our investment in our transit system and look at the land use connections and where people live in order to make the right kinds of incentives. And so this map right here is created by Greenbelt Alliance, but it's based on data that's provided by every jurisdiction in Contra Costa. And to make things simple, just look at the blue. The blue areas are all of the housing element opportunity sites that have been listed for the next cycle between 2014 and 2022. So these are all the places for infill development that can be used in a way to accommodate our growth for the next 8 years and beyond. And this is really the key to success of this measure, and it's also the real challenge of this measure. We have years of planning behind this, and there's lots of investment lined up. And we, as a county, have kind of disparately addressed this issue. And we now have an opportunity to really look at how we put our money in the right place and grow in the right ways. One of the things that's really important to mention at this point is that there are several reasons to do this. One, that there's ample evidence to show that living within a half mile of transit dramatically reduces the dependence on cars. It can't solve everything, but what it does is it significantly allows for new growth in our region to be accommodated by transit rather than putting more cars where more people are living. Building homes for income levels of a lower variety are essentially seen as one of the great environmental successes. So we see now studies showing that affordable housing near transit actually has some of the highest environmental benefits, and that's something that we should be capturing. And it also makes economic sense. It's both for housing development, but also for jobs. Employers are looking for places to invest that people want to live. People want to be able to walk between where they work and home, and if not better, at least where they work and something to eat. So, you know, we should have places that people actually want to work as well as want to live. We as a coalition also acknowledge that this is a great challenge, that not every community wants to grow, and that's why having a 30-year vision and a way that we can put this forward requires some vision over a longer period of time.
Joel, I want to make sure there's time for folks to comment, so if we...
Sure.
I hate to cut you off, so...
Okay.
Just
Great. I'll wrap it up.
wrap it up.
Sure. This is just one opportunity in Contra Costa Center where we see that what you take is a vacant parking lot and you can turn it into something special. And so we have some of kind of generation one, what it took to get some of our transit-oriented development, and what we want to do is look at some innovative ways to get there. We also have now the plans over the last 10 years to do so. So we have a growing variety of innovative ways to approach local land use connection. Some of the quick things to think about in our discussion around incentivizing infill is putting more into our transportation for livable communities program to make it a little bit more innovative and flexible, ensuring that we're kind of, as a county, all of our jurisdictions are staying compliant and maintaining the vision for a future as part of our collective county. And that if we do end up developing new transit stations and for areas that are expecting extensions, those areas need to have sufficient housing density in order to support new transportation investments. That's a really critical piece. We've seen that a lot of investment over the last 10 years has made it really difficult for people to afford where they're living, and so we've seen some of these programs around anti-displacement come out of some of our supervisors, including Supervisor Joya, who's really pushed hard on this, and so we'd like to think very carefully about how we can invest in for affordable communities. And the last piece, and one of the most critical pieces here, is to reward communities that are creating communities for all people. And this is really where it comes down to how are we actually linking our transportation dollars to land use and housing development, and doing so in a way where we're not leading down the same path before with too much congestion, particularly in Central and East County. And really the nexus here is how jurisdictions are given money to invest in their local roads and making sure that we're putting the investments in the right places so that we don't end up with this. I think none of us want to live in this, and these are images from Contra Costa, and many of us live this from day to day. So what we're doing here and what we're trying to bring forward in our transformational vision is something where we're not making the same mistakes, that we're learning from where we got, we're making these places better that might not have all the amenities, and we're moving into the future. So thank you for letting me present. Look forward to our questions.
Terrific. Thank you very much. And in lieu of the short introduction, I will say we really appreciate all the efforts that you made, and particularly during the holidays. I wanted to say that when Joel says our, he refers to the coalition of groups, the list of which is provided. Right. So there's a lot of folks who have been partner to this. Joel has obviously been partner to it, but also did some of the grunt work, or did the grunt work to put.
Yeah, and I should just do a shout out to everyone that has committed. The 24 organizations that are a part of this have really contributed a lot and a great deal of time and energy to put this together. So it's clearly not just me.
Great, thank you. So we will open up to public comment first to see if there's any folks who have public comments, general public. None, then we'll open it up to the EPAC.
Yeah, I mean, being that this is, the first time we saw this was when the presentation packet was sent out, I don't think this is something that we can support today. We'd have to look into it a little bit more. It seems like this is a plan to disincentivize fixing our crumbling highway system, which moving towards transit and helping people get around the county in better ways, I think is a good thing. But the reality is, in that 30 years, not everybody's going to take transit, and we're going to need to fix our highways. We're going to need to fix our roadways. We're going to need to have safe routes to schools and increased bike lanes. And unfortunately, it's not all going to be solved by mass transit. We're going to have to pour some concrete. That's just the way it is. And also, it seems like this is a plan to subsidize infill and affordable housing, which is fine, but it's not something that should be rolled into a transportation-specific sales tax. We've had trouble with that elsewhere. So, I mean, not having a chance to get into the details of what this is something that we're going to have to not support today. Thank you.
Just thank you very much for your comments. Just to be clear, there's no expectation that people come to conclusions about where they stand. Obviously, we want to hear what you have to say, but
well, if this is up for adoption by the EPAC, I can't support that.
Thank you. Okay. Other comments?
It's fabulous.
Please.
Thank you, and all the work that went into this and the ideas is very much appreciated. The Board of Supervisors has looked at this, and they've also thought a little bit outside of the box as far as congestion management, and that's to create jobs in places so people don't have to drive Highway 4, to develop, for example, the northern waterfront. And I know we talk about PDAs and PCAs, but Julie Pierce and the folks are doing a lot of work on priority industrial areas. We think that should be recognized as well and be part of the thinking of the EPAC group. To create jobs, we need goods movement, and goods movement is really one of the cornerstones of economic development. So we'd like to include that as a discussion item.
Thank you very much. Just a clarifying comment.
Well, not so much a clarifying comment, just to kind of get back to Sean's comment, where we're trying to go with this. So, again, if you will, I'd ask you to look at the handout summary of CCTA and EPAC policy topic lists. And again, this is what we're trying to do is formulate this into an outline of what we talk about in our future meetings. So Rich brought up a point about priority industrial areas, and others may have similar comments of things they didn't necessarily see pop off the page in Joel's presentation. What I would ask is as you think about your comments here, from what you've seen in Joel's presentation of what we put on this document, are there big things we need to talk about that aren't on this page? Because again, the next agenda item is going to be to have some discussion about incentivizing infill. But what we want to walk away, one of the things we want to do walking away from this meeting is to have a good idea of what we need to accomplish in the next couple of months, and we're trying to do that through this document. So if you don't see something that's in part of Joel's presentation or part of what you think we've talked about in the EPAC meeting or something new you brought with us today, that's what we want to do, is to organize our discussions around these major topics. So,
and just as we don't see the siloing of transportation and land use and growth management, all these other issue areas, I think we as a coalition also recognize that we don't want to be lumped into a box where we're not talking amongst those around the table. So I agree with what you're saying, Ross. We have a comment over here from Matt.
The existing 2009 countywide transportation plan says that the objective is to get people out of their single occupancy cars. What I don't see in this is reducing vehicle miles traveled in cars and light trucks.
Okay, reducing SOVs. Yeah. Randy, there you are.
You know, one of the things that isn't on this list here for discussion that's very important to my board chair and I is goods movement. As the population of the United States and more than likely California, for some reason people want to live in California, it's going to require more movement of goods, and unless we're going to deliver those goods by drones, we're going to have to deliver and utilize the surface transportation system. So you should talk about the needs of that as well, because there's going to be some definite issues in the future.
Ivy, could you get a speaker card? We want to figure out who this guy is.
I'll get a speaker card next time.
That's right. Technically, you're a member of the general public.
Yeah, did he just get fired?
It's the last thing I'll say. Other thoughts and things that we need to talk about that we may not have talked about, or responses to what's been put together so far? Yes?
I would just say, having been a small, tiny piece of that process, this is a lot further than where we were a month and a half ago. And I think that this is an excellent springboard to spark conversation and discussion and figure out where we need to go. And I don't think it eliminates the possibility for anything to come forward. And I really just want to appreciate the work that was done on it, because I think it's tremendous.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. And I think it's a matter of taking this and taking this and taking some of the other pieces and putting them together, and then making sure that they reflect what input has been provided to date, and see where we go from there. So other comments on this topic, and then we'll move on to infill. Please.
Yeah, this is Tim Leong, Contra Costa Community College District. I just wanted to echo your comments. I thought that this was a good presentation. Perhaps maybe we would be in a different place had we had something like this earlier on. But I guess, so the question that I have for you, and maybe this is not the right time, but I guess I'm trying to understand what alignment does what the coalition is proposing, what's the alignment with Measure J? What is it doing on top of Measure J, or is it deviating from the direction and priorities of Measure J? Or are all these, I'm a novice in the transportation area, so I'm just trying to better understand. Are we enhancing what we've already started with Measure J with some of the things that you're talking about? Or is it a deviation such as, I don't know, like we talked about the urban limit line, trying to address that? Can you help me with that, or is that not the right time to ask?
I think it's the right time to ask the question. I don't think I have a really good response yet because our coalition hasn't discussed that particular item. I think that what is really clear is that there are things that need to move significantly forward. So there are things that need tweaking, enhancements, and then there are things that need big leaps forward, things that need to be changed pretty substantially in order to accommodate what's going to happen over the next 20 or 30 years. So it's a little bit of everything, perhaps. And the thing that we're trying to work as we continue to work with a variety of stakeholders as well as staff and commissioners themselves is what was Measure J, and what will it continue to be over the next 20 years, and what does this do to go beyond that? And I think that that's an ongoing discussion, and I really look forward to having that with you as well as others here. So I hope that more or less answers that.
Tim, Bill, Ray has further response.
Well, I actually think this is a good segue into the next item because it's going to provide an opportunity for us as a consultant team to start talking about how we're processing this information, and in particular this incentivizing infill development. So I think it might be a demonstration of kind of what our thought process is and how we intend to get to a point where we're going to react to those very questions about the relationship between the existing Measure J and some of these new proposals. So at the appropriate time, I can start that process.
Sure. Let me just check and see if there's another comment here. Go ahead.
It's this on?
It goes on.
All right. Well, this may be so obvious as to go without saying, but I'll say it anyways. Far and away, the main interest and objective of the business community in this measure is to support funding that enables convenient commutes that people can make from their homes to their jobs in ways that support their economic health and the economic health of the Bay Area. The things that we're looking at here don't, I think embedded within them is certainly the idea that we get to a transportation system that accomplishes that. But the presentation is about other things, and getting to a convenient commute appears to be subsidiary. So I just want to state for the record that the interest of the business community is in transportation that supports convenient commutes. And if the plan doesn't very clearly accomplish that, employers in the business community are not going to be able to support it.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Excuse me. I was a member of Joel's coalition, and I'm delighted with the document. I think the Sierra Club also has a very good point, and we can't do this without talking about the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Contra Costa is saturated and congested by automobile traffic. Automobile traffic is also generating not only VMT, but greenhouse gases. And the new plan has got to represent a turning of a corner. That's why we use the word transformation. And coming back to what Mike just said, he wants a good commute. He refers to a convenient commute. I think we should try to provide not only a convenient commute, but it be understood that in many, many, many cases, that will not be a commute by private automobile, by single occupancy vehicle. And if it, to the extent that's irreducible, and obviously it's it's not going to be completely reduced. I think we need to think also about electrification. That is to say, movement against not just VMT, but also greenhouse gases.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions or comments at this point on that item number 4.1, we'll try to close that shade, sorry.
I think we'd all appreciate it.
I don't know if it's possible.
Yeah, we'll get someone on that. Let's move on to 4.2 because we wanted to, and Bill's prepared to start that discussion. Again, that's the conversation amongst the CCTA and staff here and subgroup leaders who have been tackling this issue for a while, a central issue to a lot of the topics that have been talked about so far. So, Bill, you want to start off?
Thank you, Ben. I've been involved in a lot of these measures over the years, and the word transformative to me in 88, and I've said this before, but I want to remind people that, we added the word growth management to the plan, and it started a dialogue amongst the various regions of this county that's been very positive and proactive over the years. And then in 2004, we talked about the urban limit line, and we implemented, as Joel pointed out, a TLC program, a Transportation for Liberals Community, and about 5% of the measure, the current measure, goes into that TLC program. And I look back at the expenditure plan document that Ross went through a little bit today, but there were 4 goals in there: that new growth should pay for its transportation demands, that cooperative transportation and land use planning, support land use planning patterns for efficient use of transportation systems, and then lastly, on the 4 points, support infill and redevelopment in existing urban areas. So, the reality is, I'm a civil engineer and a transportation guy. I've been in business for a long time. The reality is that we have to find alternatives to the single occupant vehicle, but we can't go there just overnight. And we still have serious transportation problems that we have to deal with. And we have to get through the voter approval. So I wanted to give you a sense and start the dialogue on this incentivizing infill, which was a priority on Joel's the community vision document, and they pointed out 4 or 5 points here. And I made some of these comments to the board the other day, and we started a nice, robust dialogue, and that's the kind of dialogue we need to start. They had 5 suggestions, in establishing a new competitive fund similar to the One Bay Area OBAG program. It's basically a competitive grant program to provide funding for some of these incentives. Having everybody basically comply with their state-approved housing element, new transit projects demonstrate, basically transit supportive housing within the area of new development. A program to address anti-displacement, and then lastly, a pretty radical one in my mind for this county would be to reallocate our return to source funds based on distribution that MTC uses on these OBAG funds. But what I wanted to give you is kind of our reaction. First of all, I happen to agree with a lot of the comments and the objectives here, but our consultant team, because we went through this in 2004, and it was an eerily similar discussion. Out of that, a very similar group, EPAC at that time, we came up with the TLC program, and the TLC program is a program that's working. It's starting to get a life of its own, so the question is that how do we deal with some of these requests, and in a way that fits into the ultimate product that we're going to have to work up, and that is a draft of an expenditure plan. And I would, a lot of the questions here are, people want us to get specific. They want us to see what the proposal is, and I would point out in the calendar that was talked about today, March 10th meeting, we've committed as staff and the consultant team to have a draft document. It'll come out either then or ahead of then, more likely ahead of that meeting. So that'll be a document that basically demonstrates how we've processed all of the information we're getting from you, from the various coalitions, from the public meetings, the public opinion research, and then we always have to test it with reality of the 2/3 vote requirement, and frankly the reality of having to get enough money to run a campaign. So I mean, there's a lot of tests that come out to this. But in terms of the incentivizing infill development, Ross said at the board meeting, and so I keep repeating this, is that, development within the urban limit lines is good, and development within the PDAs and within the we call our urbanized cores, or the center of all of our little cities, there is something that needs some incentives for development. So our thought here in this, how to deal with this element of the community vision, is to augment and supplement the current TLC program, not set up a separate standalone program, but rather to augment that program. And then as a part of that, we call it TLC Plus, or we could call it different things, but we look within that TLC program to augment or change or enhance it. One of the challenges that was talked about here is we've got an existing TLC program, and then we're talking about an enhancement to that. At least in this area, we would hope that we could align those two, so that if we have a 5% now in the measure, say if we put another 5%, which effectively would double the program, and then we can enhance it and tweak it a little bit, because we are all on the same team of it makes transit work better, it makes the communities work better if we can incentivize infill. Interesting, we've had a couple smaller group meetings with Joel and some of his coalition members, as well as the business community, and there's consensus if we can figure out a way to incentivize infill and make it easier for our decision makers. And in this context, I'm thinking of the cities, individual cities, where there's constant discussions and debates within communities about density, about infill, and if we can come out through this process as a bit of an incentive, to help inform that dialogue, maybe provide some incentives for the infill, we're going to achieve something. So that's the criteria that we're looking at. So the option would be, and there's some things in their proposal that dealt with housing, for example, and they suggested that all jurisdictions hold an annual public informational hearing on their annual housing element report, the progress report that they send off to the Department of Housing and Community Development. And as an example, that the city's already required to do that, but one of my favorite words is sunshine. If we can, through this process, provide some more clarity or sunshine on the decisions that are being made, not changing the process, but just disclosing what the issue is, that helps groups, the various groups around the table, in effect, advocate for that infill, and that might be helpful there. One of the other ones talked about the issue, and it's a more difficult issue, of displacement as a part of this incentivize. It's a difficult issue. It's being discussed and debated at the regional level significantly. At a minimum, I think what our suggestion is going to be to the CCTA board is that they comply with whatever the outcome of that regional discussion and debate is, but not try to do their own standalone program. But that's not to say that, and this gets over into the projects or program side, that communities that receive dollars could use those and apply them as they see appropriate, and including anti-displacement processes. But we don't right now see it appropriate to put a separate category of dollars in there. So what I'm trying to give you is a sense that we're trying to find ways to meld the various requests into what is the current programs that work. And we're actually searching, and I would love today to have, I keep challenging people this, and there's no easy solution, but ways to incentivize infill development. This county is strong on local control, and we can't penalize non-compliance. It's just not going to work, and it's not going to fly, nor are the communities it's going to be difficult with the voters. But providing incentives, providing tools and methods. I like to use an example in my own community of Clayton. Julie's here today, but there's a proposal by a developer to put, a 60-unit development or some higher density in Clayton, and you'd think the world was coming to an end because it's high density, but it would make transit, the little bit of transit we have, and our little downtown better. So. But it's difficult because you get a lot of people showing up that they like status quo and they don't want change in their community. I've sat through a lot of planning commissions in my life, and I know that that's tough. So the question is how we can take the goal, which is to provide infill and incentivize it, and we're talking about a small part of these dollars. We're not talking about significant, and I'm not proposing that we take away from the overarching need of dealing with traffic and congestion, but we're not, for example, going to widen Ignacio Valley Road, or we're not going to widen 680 other than maybe some auxiliary lanes and a few things like that. We have to find a better way of doing it, and future topics will talk about how we're thinking about those. But in this case, incentivizing infill is something that we think is best handled through an augmented or pumped up, if you will, TLC program. In that focus.
So while you're thinking about your comments, don't lose thought of those. Amy, could you put up the PowerPoint? There was a slide, and one of the slides in Joel's PowerPoint focused specifically on infill. So there was a number of bullets. There's a number of bullets, I think, that could focus us in the discussion. And then when Bill talks about enhanced TLC, if you look at your Measure J document that we walked through prior, page 31 talks about the goals of the TLC program and how that would is structured to incentivize development. So while you're thinking about your comments, think about those two pieces of information as well.
Thanks, Ross. Okay, so before we get the EPAC comments, I just wanted to see if there's any general public comments. Seeing none. Okay, Joel?
I'm sorry, you grabbed your microphone.
Oh.
You wanted to say something?
No, okay. Other comments over there? Yeah.
Yeah, Bill, I was hoping you could clarify. You talk about the incentives for infill development as being a small pot of money, but in the transformational document that you sent out, you were talking about allocating return to source funds under some provisions that would certainly incentivize infill, and those, to me, would be a significant source of money. So
Well,
can you just kind of clarify those two?
There's two places. First of all, the Transportation for Livable Community Program had 5% in the last measure, and our thought right now is something equivalent to that. The return to source is much more complicated. Yes, it could be all or some portion of any new return to source could be conditioned, but it's pretty clear that we would get we're already getting a lot of pushback in terms of strings to the, in effect, pothole money, those dollars. And I don't see, other than, we maybe we go with another 18 or 20% in terms of, the pure money, using the same guidelines we have in the current measure. We might suggest at some point a delta a little bit more, 5% or something like that, if there were some compliance. But right now, we're inclined not to do it on the return to source dollars, but rather look to the TLC program. So if that answers the question.
And clear on what the TLC program is? Bill, can you?
Well, yeah, look at page 31 of the Measure J expenditure plan. So the TLC goals, I'll just read those real quick. Help create walkable, pedestrian-friendly neighborhoods and business districts, promote innovative solutions, including compact building design and context-sensitive site planning that is integrated with the transportation system. So I think that gets towards convenient commute if we do it right and provide the right transportation system. Help create walkable, pedestrian-friendly access linking housing and job centers to transit. So again, trying to get to recognizing that people's movement from their home to their job is really key to this. Help create affordable housing, encourage a mixture of land use and support, encourage a mixture of land uses and support, I think we have an error in here, and supports a community's development or redevelopment activities. Redevelopment, as I think we all know, redevelopment agencies are a thing of the past, so I think that also goes into the discussion of return to source. And then provides for a variety of transportation choices to enhance a community's mobility, identity, and quality of life. So those are the goals, and I guess I'd add Joel and the coalition if these are, I think, consistent goals with a lot of things you're promoting. So that's why this is one that we've thought could be a way to help incentivize, help backfill some of the dollars that were lost through the dissolution of redevelopment agencies. And then towards Andy's comment, someone that understands civic psychology better than I, is it better to directly fund these activities or to say, if you do these things, we'll give you money that you can use for something else? So it's, that's that getting into this carrot and stick. I don't know that any of us care if it's a carrot or stick. What's the best way to get the outcome that we want?
So Rita and then Joel.
Okay, I just wanted to ask Bill again. He said something about the housing elements of the city's work on and incorporating this into that. I don't know what the timeline is for other cities. San Pablo has already finished theirs a few months ago, because I was involved in that. And we're good. I mean, it's been approved for 8 years now. And I think like El Cerrito and some of the other cities have just done theirs. So.
Well, the request was by the community vision document was more of a public hearing every year by a city on this. What we've come to learn is that cities are doing that already. And so what our thought process is now is one of the compliance requirements that the authority now uses is a thing they call a checklist, and they just require the cities to check off all the compliance with all the growth management elements. And one thought we have, and it's just a thought, or a proposal maybe from the consultant team, is that we use that compliance, that checklist as maybe add to it some more disclosure. I can tell you, we got a little bit of pushback in some of the other venues that we've talked about this in, because the comment was it's already law, we already do it. So, but that's the kind of discussion that I think would be helpful in groups like this, is that would it be helpful in a community not to necessarily tie it to a new requirement, but to simply acknowledge when, for example, the public hearing, if San Pablo already had a hearing, that just put it on there that says we had a hearing on December 11th and it's done. And so it's not a requirement. If you don't have the hearing, at least the thought we have right now is it wouldn't be a requirement as much as a disclosure. Because over my career, I've always thought sunshine on some of these issues is a good approach, because sometimes, if local control is important, there's nothing to. I don't think we want to recommend that they already get into the role of being a policeman, but rather a disclosure process. So that's the thought process that we have, is that, if a community, for whatever the reason, wants to go a different direction, that's not directly related to the pothole filling or the transportation problems that we're really trying to solve. We can't lose sight of that. I always try to test all this stuff on terms of the reality of what we're doing, what our purpose is. And there's a transportation purpose. Now, infill is good because it offsets a lot of that, but this is a difficult balance, and the authority board ultimately is going to have to weigh this, but they would be looking for a group like this, as an example, for a recommendation on how we deal with some of these issues.
We have about 5 minutes.
I'm just going to make a call to those who may seem to have even the inclinations of ideas about where to be innovative about this, and not to think about what are our boundaries. But we, as the advisory committee, are not the commissioners, and we have an exciting opportunity to think a little bit outside the box. So it's just another call that with the time that we have left, let's put our thinking hats on here quickly and continue to think afterwards. And if we have ideas, let's share them, because those boxes have not entirely been drawn so far. And I know there are people around the table that have ideas, so let's hear them. Come on.
Well, I don't want to get in the way of anyone who has an idea. So cut me off if you do. But so I'm as I listen to Bill's suggestion about how to kind of reconcile what the electeds can deal with and what Joel's coalition is suggesting and what a lot of us would like to see. What I'm asking myself is, should I and the Bay Area Council think about this suggestion to double the size of the TLC program as something that will actually result in more infill housing units, in which case we would be totally excited about it? Or should we think about it as something that, maybe it could, but what we know it'll do is produce some nice streetscape projects. And I've seen that in a lot of places, at least in other counties that also have TLC programs. Nice streetscape projects that have not been tied to or resulted in any new housing development. If anyone can help me answer the question of how I should think about it, or what we might want to do beyond the existing TLC program to ensure that we really do get the housing out of it, that's kind of where my thinking's going.
Yeah, well, two things. I think that's a good comment, and you know, I for one would like to see a realistic program and not just, you know, better sidewalks or better streets in a community that already had them. So it does need to be meaningful. I would say that, you know, one of the things that's been happening and successful over the last few months is some of these small group discussions, and we've had some pretty interesting discussions involving representing the business community and the environmental community and the community vision on this issue. I won't say that they're in agreement, but and some of the same comments that Michael just commented. Realistically, it would be a win for all of us if we could even slightly provide an incentive for more robust infill development and more robust discussion in that context. So it's a goal, and like we added growth management and like we added urban limit lines, I think if we can come out of this process even slightly incentivizing this infill, we're going to have a win. I know that the public likes it. It's not off the charts. They want us to deal with the potholes and the congestion and BART problems right off the top, but they do support and endorse growth management elements, and they support these kind of things. So we're looking for input. The last comment is that these subgroups are meeting, so if you've got ideas you don't want to bring them up today, just get them to your representatives and make sure that they're articulated.
Ron.
There's a button, yeah.
Right in the front part.
Hello, okay. So I just wanted to comment about, thank you very much, sir. The electrician did that. Yeah. The document that Joel was taking us through there and giving some perspective on, I don't think is meant to be a document that is in concrete, that was brought to this group with the intent of saying supported or not. I think it was put together by an evolving group, as was stated, of organizations and individuals who have contributed their thoughts and ideas to it. And so, you know, 3 months ago, the beginnings of that paper and document looked very different and sounded, I think, very different than they do today. And it has been modified as a result of the expansion of the voices that have added to the conversation and to the evaluation of each of the sections there, and it's a living document that is trying to evolve and trying to involve more voices. So the list of people who were endorsers is quite out of date, I think, at this point. There have been many, many more individuals and organizations that have participated, and it's the only document that we have at this point that's actually beginning to lead us into hopefully some substantive conversations about some serious issues. And I think what I'm trying to say is I believe that the process is open to having everybody who has a question about the entire process or specific portions of it to share your thoughts and input and get them to the consultant group or to the staff team and let them see if they can figure out how they can get involved in some of the ongoing conversations of the subgroups in order to help further evolve this document so it ultimately becomes a vision for everybody that we can all support and accomplish all of the objectives. So that's my...
I'm going to try to maybe summarize a little bit about what we're trying to do today and a couple of things that we've heard. So really what we wanted to do is, you know, talk about, revisit this structure. Where are we going? What's the end look like? So if you have any questions about that, you know, talk to me. I'll be or Bill. We'll be happy to walk you through that. And then we want to just introduce the community vision. I think, at least my understanding and being involved in this last month and a half, what Ron said, I think hits the nail right on the head. It's a lot of folks putting a lot of time and energy into this. Provides a good framework. It's a term I'm using. I couldn't be more grateful to the folks that have worked on this to give us something to either get behind and support, shoot at, give us something to talk about. So I really appreciate that, and get your input into anyone involved in that, staff consultants, Joel and Ron and others, Kristen and Lisa have been in a lot of discussions. So, you know, if we either run out of time or you don't want to say something here, talk to those folks. Well, I heard, I think Joel and Mike almost asked the same question, just a different way. You know, there's been a proposal put on the table. There's been some discussion by Bill on, you know, some initial thoughts, and talking to a lot of different folks, city managers, other stakeholders, some of our folks. And Joel's asking for folks to express their reaction to that. Mike saying, well, how does this work? I kind of think it's almost the same question, so I think we can take that up again. So what I'm trying to do is wrap it up and give you things, some homework, I guess, some things to think about between now and the last, or our next meeting. And I wanted to, last thing I want to say is to close a thought. Dave made a comment about Complete Streets as not being part of TLC, and I think I wasn't necessarily, when I was going through the document, I wasn't necessarily saying that. It was, the question was, is a complete pot for Complete Streets, for example, is that something that could be added in addition to TLC? So think about that, and that could be part of the conversation as well. For those that have had time to, you know, a lot of folks have been talking or thinking about it. If you have reaction to those statements, I'd like to leave that as your go away for the meeting, unless there's anything else that Joel or Bill or anyone that's been vocal want to chat about. I'd like to give you, Joel, a chance to wrap things up too. Just
Sure, yeah, I think if there's a comment.
Make sure we're on the same page.
I think Mike really asked a great question, which is what is the thing that will create the incentive? And I think that's what we're searching for. And we've proposed a few different things, which is both a program to fund some of those things that are targeted towards that, and as well as an incentive structure based on putting the money where it's really important, and that comes back as well to other pots of money. So, you know, we're trying to think about the things that we can do the best, and those conversations are ongoing. So thanks.
Great, thank you very much. And if I do nothing this afternoon, it's going to be get you out of here on time, so I've got about 10 seconds. I just want to thank everybody for spending the time coming out here. I hope this was worthwhile to get a sense of where we're at and what we have and what path we're on. I encourage, and the team encourages, people to keep an open mind and think innovatively. If you have additional information, as Ross mentioned, or want to opine on some of this beyond what's transpired today, we encourage you to make those inputs to us and to the group. We definitely think there's an opportunity here, and we want to pursue it, and the team is doing that. The timeline is short, but people are working hard, and hopefully we'll get to a good place. I'll remind folks that the next meeting of the EPAC will be at a different location, the Assembly Hall in Walnut Creek at 1375, and you have that in your packet, and that'll be on Thursday, February 11th. From 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock. We'll probably send an email blast out to remind folks of when the meeting is nearby. And we will bring the TEP or a draft TEP with us to the next meeting, or you will receive it beforehand. I'm sorry, March
10th or earlier.
March 10th or earlier. I misspoke, but I wanted to make sure that everybody was clear that that's the path that we're on to, and that's the timing. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it, and folks will stick around if people still have questions. Thank you.